Hey, let's give God praise for that music. Just really, really wonderful. We forget just how blessed we are. We kind of get used to it, you know. Have you ever been to a liturgical church? Some of you probably raised in liturgical, formal church, you know what I'm talking about? A church that has a lot of obvious structure to the service, rites and rituals and set prayers that everybody reads together, maybe some incense, a creed, or something. Anybody ever been to a liturgical? Okay, you must have. Some of you grew up in liturgical churches. First time I experienced it, because my church was, as Fred Craddock said, about as liturgical as corn on the cob. But the first time I ever, visited a liturgical church, there was one part of the service that just grabbed me right away, caught my attention, caught me off guard too. We went to visit an Anglican church, and Episcopalian, I think, but definitely in the Anglican tradition. And right at the beginning, the pastor comes up and he goes, "The Lord be with you." And everybody said, "Also with you." And, I'm standing there and somebody says, "Lord be with you." And I'm going, "Yeah, you too." Now, it's a greeting. It's a call to worship. It can be used in a lot of ways, but it's a greeting. But it's more than that. It's not just a greeting. It's a reminder that the Lord has welcomed us, that He's with us, that we are not alone. The Lord be with you. There's more to life than what we see. There's more to this world than what we can lay our hands on. And because He is with us, you and I, we can have a settled calm about this life that we're in. David's testimony in Psalm 145, "The Lord is near to all who call upon Him, to all who call upon Him in truth." 46, "The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our refuge." And then there's that great promise of Isaiah 41, "Fear not, for I am with you." Jesus Himself said, "I am with you even to the end of the age." Today, we're looking at the with us God, the God who's always with us. When Moses wrote the words that we're going to read, the people hearing the story, not the ones that it's about, but the people hearing the story had already been through the Exodus and the wilderness, and they're getting ready, they're poised to enter the promised land, and it would not be easy. They would be surrounded by all kinds of horrid influences. There would be a fight to win the land, a fight against idolatry, temptation everywhere. And there was one question Moses wanted to be certain of. Would they trust the Lord, that He would be with them when they got into this place? And so, Genesis 39, to continue the Joseph story that we started last week. Now, Joseph had been taken down to Egypt. Potiphar, an Egyptian who was one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him there. The Lord was with Joseph so that he prospered, and he lived in the house of his Egyptian master. When his master saw that the Lord was with him and the Lord gave him success in everything he did, Joseph found favor in his eyes and became his attendant. Potiphar put him in charge of his household, and he entrusted to his care everything he owned. From the time he put him in charge of his household and all that he owned, the Lord blessed the household of the Egyptian because of Joseph. The blessing of the Lord was on everything Potiphar had, both in the house and in the field. So Potiphar left everything he had in Joseph's care, and with Joseph in charge, he did not concern himself with anything except for the food that he ate. Now Joseph was well built and handsome. Okay? And it came about after these things that his master's wife looked with desire at Joseph, and she said, "Come to bed with me." But he refused. "With me in charge," he told her, "my master does not concern himself with anything in the house. Everything he owns has been entrusted to my care. No one is greater in this house than I am. My master has withheld nothing from me except you, because you're his wife. How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God?" And though she spoke to Joseph day after day, he refused to go to bed with her or even to be with her. One day he went into the house to attend to his duties, and none of the household servants was inside. She caught him by his cloak and said, "Come to bed with me." But he left the cloak in her hand and ran out of the house. When she saw that he had left his cloak in her hand and had run out of the house, she called her household servants. "Look," she said, "this Hebrew has been brought to us to make sport of us. He came in here to sleep with me, but I screamed. When he heard me scream for help, he left his cloak beside me and ran out of the house." She kept his cloak beside her until his master came home. Then she told him this story. "That Hebrew slave you brought home to us came to make sport of me. But as soon as I screamed for help, he left his cloak beside me. He ran out of the house. When his master heard the story, his wife told him, saying, 'This is how your slave treated me.' He burned with anger. Joseph's master took him and put him in prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. But while Joseph was there in the prison, the Lord was with him, and he showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden." So the warden put Joseph in charge of all those things in the prison, and he was made responsible for all that was done there. The warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care, because the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did. The statement, "the Lord was with Joseph," that's the key to understanding Genesis 39. That's what this whole chapter is about. We saw it in verse 2. It says the Lord was with Joseph so that he prospered. We saw it again in 21. But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him mercy. There were two other times, but they're the bookends, the ends of the chapter. At the beginning of the chapter, the Lord was with Joseph. At the end of the chapter, the Lord was with Joseph. It's an inclusio. It's a literary device. The Bible, as it came, originally it didn't have chapter headings. It didn't have chapters. I mean, it didn't have numbered sentences or any of that kind of stuff. And so to highlight a section or to explain a section or to help comment on it, sometimes they would include the main ideas of a section on either end of it. The inclusio frames the story with a similar idea or phrase. It tells the reader what the story is all about. The Lord was with Joseph. So whatever else you may read in the middle, and there's a lot to read, whatever else lessons you may see there, and there are some, this is about what happens when the Lord is with someone. And about every one of us has an idea about what a life looks like when the Lord is with somebody, right? I mean, if we thought, what's it look like when the Lord's with somebody? Well, you live a super blessed life, right? Your very best life right now. Nobody attacks you. I mean, if God's with you, who can be against you? You have a deep sense of peace that never changes. God delivers you from every difficult situation. You always have the warmth of God's unwavering love felt in your heart. He keeps you from temptation. You always have this sense of support and protection. And I read one guy on the internet said sometimes you even have a tingling. Anybody got a tingling this morning? Well, I don't want to know if you do. To be perfectly honest, I couldn't find anything in the text about tingling or really a lot of those things that I just read. But I did see one thing that this story is about. The Lord was with Joseph. The Lord was with Joseph. And what's it look like? It's not those things that I just read. I hope you picked up on that, the slight sarcasm in my voice. What's it look like when God is with you? Well, the first thing it looks like is this: when the Lord is with you. For Joseph, he wound up in slavery. Can you imagine? 17 years old. He gets rejected by his brothers. They're going to kill him, but then they decide to take it easy and sell him into slavery. He's carted away, who knows how far, to a distant land, Egypt, and 17 years old. At 17, I was homesick thinking about leaving home the next year to go to college. And he gets carted away as a slave. How discouraged would you have been? How utterly crushed? I mean, you talk about needing therapy. He lost everything. He lost his home. He lost his homeland. He lost his language. I mean, he didn't speak Egyptian, couldn't communicate. Everything familiar, gone, including his father who loved him and whom he loved. And it says the Lord was with him. And then, the Lord is with him, and temptation attacked. Temptation, first he wound up a slave, and then temptation comes. God had just prospered Joseph when the temptation showed up. It just prospered him. For a slave, Joseph is doing pretty well for a slave. I mean, everything he touches turns to gold. His talent is obvious. His success is obvious. He's got great skill. He's got a win on every front. And even his Egyptian master, Potiphar, saw that God was with him, so he promoted Joseph. He said, you know what? You got it going on, man. I want you to run my household, everything. Put him in charge of the whole thing except for the food. Seems the Egyptians a little peculiar about who touched their food, maybe not a foreigner or a slave or something like that, but other than the food, Joseph is in charge of the whole place. Potiphar trusted him with everything in his house. We're talking about tremendous responsibility, tremendous success for Joseph. But it was right about then that the storm clouds started to gather. Moses, writing Genesis, gives us a little bit of a hint as to what's coming in verse 6. Now Joseph was well built and handsome. So the next thing we see is Joseph. He's kind of a combination of, Paul Newman, Brad Pitt, Leonardo DiCaprio, Chris Hemsworth, Timothy Chalamet. I mean, all rolled into one, right? And the storm clouds, you can see them. I mean, they are definitely coming. He didn't throw that out there because, just because he thought Joseph was attractive. It's because Potiphar's wife had her eye on smoking hot Joseph. And she looked him up and down and she said, I believe I will. I believe I will. Genesis 39:7. By the way, I didn't write Genesis. This thing's R-rated. It says it came about. Listen to this. It came about after these things. Everybody say after these things. Okay, hang on to that. It came about after these things that his master's wife looked with desire at Joseph and she said, come to bed with me. Now, we're going to get to the bed, and thankfully Joseph won't. But after these things, what things? His success, his tremendous success, after his promotion, after his increased responsibility, once everybody saw how smart and talented and powerful and beautiful he was, that's when temptation came. Let me tell you something, Christian. Success always brings with it new temptations, new hurdles, something to attack you, to undermine you. When you feel strong, you feel pretty good about yourself, got the promotion, got the new job, got the new car, whatever it is, you notched a few wins, Satan's going to come calling. When you have a triumph, beware the temptation. It's when you're winning, earning, successful, noticed, that the devil comes to whisper in your ear, come to bed with me. Come to bed with me. In short, and I'll make this part real short, Joseph said no. Period. Hard stop. No. But he had to say it over and over and over again. She just kept coming back. And finally, she tried to force the action. Like literally, she grabs him and Joseph took off, leaving his overcoat in her hands. And listen, when the temptation is strong, don't fight. Flee. Don't stay and resist. Just run. That's what Joseph did. And that's not what I'm going to focus on today, but it's pretty good advice, and we should look at it. Paul's going to say it elsewhere. It's going to come up in the Timothy correspondence and others. when you're feeling strong, when you really feel like you've arrived, you got to be ready to run when Satan comes calling. So what reward did Joseph get for his faithfulness? Because it might not, to us, look all that manly, but it is. It takes a bigger man than most of us to run, and he ran like the wind. Why? Because he was terrified. Because he admitted to himself, I am weak, God is strong, get me out of here. And he left immediately. They said no. And he ran. So what was his reward? What did he get for the faithfulness? Not much. The Lord was with Joseph, and he was unfairly judged. Okay? He was unfairly, he was traded, sold into slavery, and then he was tempted, and then he's unfairly judged. Potiphar's wife was humiliated and just angry as she could be at Joseph's refusal, his rebuttal. The poet wrote, heaven has no rage like love to hatred turned, nor hell like a fury like a woman scorned. She told her servants, and she told her husband, Potiphar, pretty much anybody who would listen, that Joseph had sexually assaulted her. One quick accusation, and his name is Mud. He'd worked hard, he'd been honest, he'd built a good reputation, and now scandal, such that he was thrown into jail. I mean, look at that list, man. I mean, it's crazy. He wound up in slavery. Temptation attacked him. He was unfairly judged. He's thrown into the jail. The Lord was with him. Does that sound like the outline that would follow? The Lord is with him? I don't know. Maybe for you, not so much for me. It's not what I expect. But she was so furious. She saw to it. And all it took for him to wind up in jail was to do the right thing and watch everything go wrong. He did the right thing and everything went wrong. She came onto him. He resisted her, and ultimately he ran from her grasp. But she framed him for attempted rape or rape, I'm not sure, and he spent the next 3 or so years in prison. The Lord was with Joseph. And he was enslaved, tempted, judged, and jailed. Moses wants us to see that the Lord was with Joseph through all of these trials, through all of the twists and turns, the plot twists of the story. It's not always easy to see, especially in our own lives. It doesn't always fall out the way we expect, the way we want it to, if God's really with us. Let me tell you, even when you do the right thing, the result can look all wrong, all messed up. It's a mistake, friends, to think that if you're close to God, your life's going to be smooth sailing. In 21st century American church, we love this. We embrace it. I know we don't like to say it, we don't want to admit it, but we think that people who are faithful to God, close to God, are going to have these beautiful magazine cover, Facebook and Instagram kind of lives. And if hard times come, we start to question what's going on in heaven. What's the problem? If you do the right thing and there's this messiness in your life, it must mean there's a mistake made somewhere. Genesis 39 wants to correct that idea and wants to remind you of the bookends of the story, the real truth, what this story is about. The Lord was with Joseph. Doesn't mean his life's going to be easy. Instead, we find that he suffered. Slavery, temptation, false accusations, wrongful imprisonment, and the Lord was with him. Every step of the way, the Lord was with him. Friends, let me tell you something. That temptation of yours that just won't quit, it just won't stop. It haunts you. It bothers you. It doesn't mean that God has deserted you. or abandoned you or doesn't love you. You can do the right thing, and still the results can look all kinds of wrong. Most of the time you hear, I alluded this earlier to this, most messages you hear on this passage focus on the temptation that Joseph endured. And it is in the story, and it fills the middle part of it. It does. But ultimately, this is not about Joseph's faithfulness. His faithfulness is there, and it is impressive, and there is something to be learned from it. But this is not about how to win over temptation, even though he did. And it's amazing with all kinds of lessons about resisting, especially the part about fleeing. Distance, get out of there. But this is a lesson about something completely different from beginning to end. This story most emphatically is not about Joseph. I mean, remember that? The bookends. Repeated 4 times in the chapter. The Lord was with Joseph. The Lord was with Joseph. The Lord was with him. The Lord was with Joseph. This is a story with one hero, and it's Yahweh. It's the Lord. And this is true, by the way, throughout the whole Old Testament. I mean, it's true about the whole of it. This is how Joseph could say no. He believed in a God who refused to leave him. A God who refuses to leave you, who stays with you. His very presence is the thing that we are to value the most. The Lord was with Joseph. That's why I started this message out with, is the Lord with you? I mean, is he with you? Joseph said yes, and that's how he could say no. It's why he took off running. It's why he could endure prison. It's why he wanted the Lord's presence more than he wanted Potiphar's wife. And it forces the question onto us. What do you want? I mean, what exactly do you want? A few minutes pleasure or the eternal presence of God? Joseph chose God. God's abiding presence with him over everything else. Friends, if you want God's presence, walk God's path. If you want God's presence, walk God's path. You can't wander off in your own direction and expect God to follow after you. It doesn't work that way. You can't over time consistently disobey God and still walk with God. Joseph stayed faithful. Did you know this? Throughout his entire life, he stayed faithful. Maybe the most remarkable man in that sense, or certainly among them, in the entire Old Testament. Did you know there is no recorded sin with all of these chapters? No sin recorded, specific thing that Joseph did wrong, sinful, not one. I mean, no sin, we know he wasn't perfect. I mean, he wasn't sinless. The Bible says all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. And everybody who exists needs Jesus, needs God's way in order to be saved. But the biblical scholars tend to agree there's no mention of any specific wrongdoing anywhere by Joseph. You can't say that for Adam, Noah, Abraham, Moses, Samson, David, Solomon, all of them profoundly wicked. They're not heroes. I mean, God was the hero in every one of those stories. I mean, the great men, God used them, and great in the sense that they repented and probably repented again and again. But Joseph was not like those other men, at least not the way the Bible presents him. He wanted God's presence more than he wanted anything else. Friends, if you want God's presence, walk God's path. It's the way it works. Here's a start. Here's a start. Surround yourself with saints. Surround yourself with saints. Are you in a Sunday school class? Because when we get done here in just a minute, or 4 or 10, when we get done, we're going to have a Sunday school hour. And if you go out these doors and walk up the bridge, somebody's going to snatch you. Marjorie, will you do that? Somebody's going to snatch and get you in a Sunday school class. It's going to be awesome. They're going to open the Bible. They're going to learn about following Jesus. You could stay in this room, have the same thing. There are other places where we have adult classes, one over in the gym upstairs, just wonderful groups to study the Bible. But you got to surround yourself with believers. Are you in a life group? I mean, are you in a life? You know, we've got these small groups that meet in homes for the purposes of reading the Bible together and fellowshipping together and praying for each other. You know, if you're not in a life group, man, you need to be getting a life. You know, if worship is kind of a hit or miss thing with you, and maybe I'm preaching to the choir here, but bear with me. If worship's a hit or miss thing, you know, make it weekly. Give God this hour. Above everything else, give God the hour. Or Wednesday night. We got awesome study for women right now. Come be a part of that. I mean, it is fabulous. Every woman in here should be here on Wednesday night. Why? Because you're surrounded by saints. You're going to do other things, but you're surrounded by saints. You may not think you need that, but you do. You need them all. It's an and, not an or. You're every day in the world, and 24/7 you're bombarded by unbelief. You need to surround yourself with saints. And the next thing, devote yourself to devotions. Anybody got a personal devotion going on? You know what I'm talking about? It's like when you have your own quiet time with the Bible and prayer and you and God. You know, and you read and you pray, you know, and you devote yourself to devotions. The Bible, a few minutes every day. You can jump in on our Bible over the year thing, whatever it's called. It's an app, you know, and you could get in on that a few minutes every day. In other words, listen to God. Talk to God. Devote yourself to devotions. The third thing is this. All very basic, but basic in the sense of fundamental. Basic in the sense that if you don't have this, something's really lacking. It's lacking. I mean, you may not want to agree with me, but I've got the mic right now. So, if you want God's presence, walk God's path. Here's the next one. Carry out Christ's commands. Obey. Do what he says to do. What you read, what you pray about, obey. Do. You know, share your faith. Share your funds. Share everything of your life. Be a loving, kind, generous, supportive. Carry out Christ's commands. If you're not sure what they are, you know, take a read of Matthew 5, 6, and 7. You'll have an idea when you finish. You know, forgive your foe, just like God forgives you. Obedience. Carrying out Christ's commands. That is faith. It's faith in action. And let me tell you something, friends. There's no other kind of faith. It's just not. There's no other kind of faith other than faith in action. So believe and obey. Two sides of the same coin, right? These three aren't everything, but they're pretty important and a really good start. You know, there's a story about a little boy who desperately wanted to go to his friend's birthday party on Saturday morning. So excited, you know, just really pumped. It was going to be a big party. All his friends were there. They got pony, cake. It was going to be just an awesome party. He was talking about it all week, and when he woke up Saturday morning, they had over a foot of snow, and it was snowing sideways. You've seen those, you know. It was brutal, and his daddy said, "Honey, I am so sorry, but you can't go to the party today. You just, you know, it's too dangerous." And it's, "Well, Dad, it's just you know, 5 or 10 houses down the street, you know." And he said, "I'm sorry, you just can't do it." And he just started to whine and beg and you know, everything he could to go. Finally, much to his surprise, his dad said, "You know what? Okay, you can go." And so boots and mittens and cap and scarf wrapped all the way around him 4 times like the little bitty brother on the Christmas story, he goes out into the snow and he walks and he's leaning into the wind and it's brutal. And he gets all the way to the door and he starts to go in and he looks back. He says, Daddy, turned around, walking back home. He thought he'd been out there by himself. And I know that some of you feel like you're out there by yourself sometimes. You're not. His daddy was with him the whole time. And your Abba, your daddy, will be with you the whole time. There is never truly a moment when you are on your own. Even when we struggle, even when we fall short, he is with us. Joseph was brought low so that he could be raised. We'll get there. We're not there yet. But he was brought low so that he could be raised and display the glory of God. Just like Jesus was brought low for you, died on the cross for your sins and mine, giving you an offer of life, forgiveness, community, purpose. I don't know what God's put on your heart this morning, but if you've never confessed Christ as Lord and Savior, won't you do that now? If you have a step that the Lord's laying on your heart, take it, because we're going to stand and sing right now.